It started with the sound of her own breath. Shallow, uneven, ridiculous for someone who had survived war zones and battlefield surgeries. Yet here she was, standing on an empty suburban street, trembling not from bullets flying overseas, but from the barrel of a gun pointed at her by the people who were supposed to protect her. Funny, isn't it? You can drag wounded soldiers out of burning Humvees in Afghanistan, but you can't survive a broken taillight in America. That thought alone should have made her laugh, but there was no laughter here. There was only the dry taste of dust in her mouth and the thunder of her pulse in her ears. Her name was Dr. Maya Thompson, 33 years old, Army trauma surgeon, graduate of Johns Hopkins, daughter of 2 teachers who had marched in the civil rights movement decades before she was born. Her life had been built on discipline, on excellence, on proving again and again that her skin color was not a limitation. But as the officer's hand twitched near the trigger, none of that mattered. She was not a doctor, not an officer, not a citizen. To them, she was just a black woman standing beside a car that smelled faintly of gasoline and hospital disinfectant. Hours before, she had been at the hospital, still wearing her scrubs under the white coat, her stethoscope dangling from her neck like a badge of honor. She had driven home, exhausted but satisfied after saving a young boy from a ruptured appendix. The road was quiet, the late sun painting everything gold, and she had thought stupidly, naively that for once she might feel safe. Then the flashing lights appeared, sirens in the rearview mirror, a sinking in her stomach. She pulled over quickly, hands steady on the wheel, the way her father had taught her. Do everything right. No sudden moves. Say sir and ma'am. Keep your tone polite. Survive. The officer approached, hand already hovering over his holster, eyes narrowed, as if she were a threat carved out of the evening air. License and registration. She had smiled faintly, voice calm. Of course, officer. It's in my glove compartment. May I reach for it? But his eyes had hardened, and before she could move, another squad car pulled up. 2 officers, then 3. The weight of their suspicion grew like a storm. One whispered something she couldn't hear. Then came the command. Step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. Her heart stuttered. This wasn't about a traffic violation. She knew the script, and she also knew where it could end. Still, she obeyed. Slowly, calmly, hands raised, fingers spread. And that was when the gun came up. The muzzle stared at her like an accusation. She swallowed. Her voice was steady, but inside her chest the war drums pounded. I am Dr. Maya Thompson. I'm a physician. I just left the hospital. There's no need for. Shut up and step back. The shout sliced the air. Somewhere behind the officer, a radio crackled. She felt the weight of invisible chains wrapping around her. In that moment, her life fractured into pieces: the soldier, the healer, the daughter, the black woman. Which identity would they see? Which one would they destroy? She thought of her mother's warning when she was 16. One day you'll wear all the right clothes, have all the right degrees, but to some people you'll always just be black. And that will be enough. Maya had thought she was ready for that truth, but she hadn't been ready for the trembling finger on a trigger. She hadn't been ready for the possibility that her life might end not in a war zone, but in a quiet American suburb, with her white coat fluttering like a flag no one wanted to salute. And here was the bitter irony. She had spent years stitching together torn bodies, believing in the sanctity of life, while someone sworn to protect hers was seconds away from ending it. Officer, she said again, softer this time, willing her voice not to crack. I'm unarmed. I'm complying. Please. The gun didn't lower. The air thickened. Somewhere down the street, a child's laughter echoed faintly, absurd against the tableau of fear. Her knees wanted to buckle, but she locked them, refusing to give the ground her surrender. She thought of her fellow soldiers, of the oath she had taken, of the countless times she had whispered to a dying man or woman, "Hold on, you're going to make it." Who would whisper that to her now? The answer came in silence. The answer came in the way the sun clung stubbornly to the horizon, bathing her in gold as though the world itself was determined not to let her be erased so easily. The moment stretched like glass, thin and trembling, ready to shatter. Maya could see her reflection in the officer's sunglasses, her own wide eyes, her own fear, and she wondered what he saw in return. Did he see the woman who had held a soldier's artery closed with her bare hands to save his life? Did he see the doctor who had worked 36-hour shifts so that strangers' children could breathe again? Or did he only see a body painted in the shade America still called dangerous? One wrong breath, one wrong twitch of her hand, and she could become another headline, another statistic, another name scrawled in protest on cardboard signs. Somewhere behind the officers, more cars slowed. Faces leaned out of windows. Phones were lifted, the red dots of recording lights like a field of eyes. Maya felt exposed, stripped naked by fear and spectacle. The crowd wasn't protection, it was pressure. If the shot came, the world would watch her bleed in high definition. She thought of her younger brother, Jamal. He was 16 when he had been stopped for jaywalking. Slammed against a squad car, knees scraped on asphalt. She had been in medical school then, rushing out of class to the police station, her white coat still smelling of iodine, trying to explain to officers who barely looked at her that Jamal had done nothing wrong. That day, he had gone home with bruises. Today, she feared she might not go home at all. The officer's jaw tightened. "What's in the bag?" His chin jerked toward the duffel resting on her passenger seat, its zipper partly open, revealing a corner of khaki fabric. Her stomach dropped. The bag was filled with her uniforms, medals, and letters she hadn't unpacked since she returned from deployment. Proof of who she was. Proof that she was more than what they thought. But in his eyes, it was evidence of danger. His voice sharpened. "Step back from the vehicle. Now." She obeyed, the sun hot on her skin, sweat crawling down her spine. Her mind raced. Should she tell them? Should she shout that she was one of them? A protector? A servant of the nation? But what if the words only poured gasoline on the fire? Soldiers weren't immune from prejudice. She knew names, faces, friends who had worn the same uniform and still died at the hands of fear. Still, silence was not survival. Her throat burned, but she forced the words out. "That bag contains my military gear. I am a U.S. Army officer. I just returned home last week." A ripple went through the crowd. Someone gasped. A phone shifted, angle changing. The officer hesitated, the muzzle lowering an inch, but no more. His partner, younger, less rigid, frowned. "She could be telling the truth, man. Look, those are medals." His finger pointed toward the faint gleam of silver inside the bag. But the older officer shook his head. "Could be stolen. Could be fake. Don't let her distract you." Maya's chest tightened. Distract. As if her existence was a trick. As if her words were weapons. She wanted to scream, but the voice that came out was calm, measured, the voice of a surgeon steadying her hands over an open chest. "Sir, I have my military ID. It's in my wallet. If you'll allow me, I can show you." "Don't move," he barked. "Hands up." Her arms ached from holding them aloft, but she kept them raised. The golden light was sinking now, stretching shadows long across the asphalt. Time was running out. Then came the sound that broke the air, the crack of a branch under a child's foot. A boy had wandered too close from the sidewalk, eyes wide with curiosity, holding his mother's hand loosely. He couldn't have been more than 7. The sudden noise made the officer flinch, finger jerking dangerously near the trigger. Maya froze, breath caught in her throat. In that single heartbeat, the world balanced on the edge of disaster. If the gun fired, it would not just take her life, it would scar the boys forever. Something primal surged in her. She took a step forward, voice ringing out with the authority of command she had used on battlefields. "Hold your fire." The words were so sharp, so undeniable, that even the officer blinked. The mother yanked her child back, stumbling onto the curb. Silence fell again, but it was thinner now, cracking at the edges. The younger officer looked unsettled, sweat gathering at his temple. "She's not a threat. Look at her. She's not resisting." "You don't know that," the older one muttered, but his hand trembled. For the first time, Maya felt something shift. Not safety, but possibility. She lowered her voice, steady and human. "I served this country. I bled for it. I held soldiers' lives in my hands. And right now, all I'm asking is for the chance to show you who I am. I'm not your enemy. Please." The younger officer's jaw worked, his gaze flickering between Maya and his partner. Finally, he spoke, softer. "Let her get the ID. If she lies, we'll know." The command was not his to give, but the older man wavered. Pride fought with doubt on his face. At last, grudgingly, he gave a short nod. Slow. One hand only. Relief was dangerous, it made your body weak, but she couldn't stop the shudder that ran through her. With excruciating care, she reached for her pocket, pulled out the worn leather wallet, and held up the card. The gold letters gleamed faintly in the dying sun. Captain Maya Thompson, United States Army Medical Corps. Silence spread wider. The phones caught it all, the hesitation, the truth, the undeniable proof. For the first time, the officer's gun dipped toward the ground. His lips pressed thin, his authority crumbling under the weight of evidence. But the damage was done. Maya knew it, the crowd knew it. You could lower a gun, but you could not erase the sight of it aimed at her chest. She slipped the ID back into her wallet, her hands still steady though her insides shook. She didn't thank him. She didn't say a word. Gratitude had no place here. Only survival. The younger officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you're free to go." The absurdity of the words nearly undid her. Free to go. As if she had been anything but captive since the lights flashed behind her car. As if freedom were theirs to grant. She nodded once, turned, and walked back to her vehicle. The crowd buzzed, whispers rising, phones still raised. She sat in the driver's seat, shut the door, and only then allowed her hands to tremble against the steering wheel. Her chest rose and fell, each breath a battle. She had survived, but survival was not victory. She started the engine, pulled away from the curb, and drove without looking back. The golden light had faded into dusk, and the road ahead stretched empty, endless. Yet inside her mind, the scene replayed again and again. The gun, the crowd, the child's wide eyes. She had worn a white coat. She had carried medals. She had spoken the truth. And still, it had taken proof carved into plastic for them to see her as human. The thought dug into her ribs like a blade. She drove until the hospital lights glowed on the horizon. Work was safety, in its own way. There, she was Dr. Thompson, the one who saved lives. But even as she walked through the sterile halls, even as nurses nodded and patients smiled, the weight clung to her shoulders. She couldn't shake the knowledge that outside these walls, a badge and a gun had almost erased her entire existence. Later that night, she sat in her apartment, medals spread across the table, the duffel finally unpacked. Her fingers traced the cold edges of silver and bronze. They were supposed to mean something. Service, honor, protection. Yet all she felt was the echo of that shouted command step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. She thought of writing a report, of filing a complaint, of demanding justice. But she had seen enough cases vanish into silence. Enough names forgotten. Still, she couldn't let this vanish. Not when her life had hung on a thread. Not when a child had almost witnessed a killing. So she began to write. Not a complaint. Not yet. But a story. Her story. Word by word, she poured the truth onto the page. Not for herself, but for the world. If they wanted to erase her, she would carve her existence into permanence. She wrote until dawn, her eyes burning, her hands aching. And when the first light spilled through her window, golden and unrelenting, she looked at the words she had created and felt, for the first time, a spark of control. They had tried to reduce her to a target. She would rise as a voice. The story spread faster than she could have imagined. By the end of that same week, the video recorded by a stranger had been uploaded, shared, dissected, and debated across every screen in America. Millions of eyes watched the grainy footage of Dr. Maya Thompson standing in the golden light, hands raised, a gun aimed at her chest. Millions of voices argued about what it meant. Some saw a hero nearly erased by fear and prejudice. Others saw only a routine stop that escalated because of misunderstandings. Maya had not planned to become a symbol. She had only wanted to survive. But the world does not ask permission when it decides to place your name in its mouth. News vans parked outside the hospital. Anchors rehearsed questions designed to pierce, to provoke. Headlines screamed, "Black Doctor, War Hero, almost shot by police." Politicians issued statements dripping with selective outrage. Her phone buzzed with messages from strangers, some offering solidarity, others laced with venom. In the hallways of the hospital, her colleagues looked at her differently. Some eyes brimmed with respect. Others held discomfort, the quiet fear that her presence now carried weight they did not want to carry. Maya worked her shifts as though nothing had changed, but the walls felt thinner, the air heavier. Patients whispered when she walked past. Nurses lingered near the televisions in the break room, glancing toward her when the news replayed the footage. At night, when her apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, she replayed it too. The moment when the gun trembled, when the child gasped, when she said, "Hold your fire." Each time she watched, her pulse raced anew. Each time, she felt the bullet that never came. One evening, a knock rattled her door. She opened it to find Jamal standing there, taller now, his teenage shoulders broader, but his eyes still carrying the spark of the boy she had once protected. He held up a newspaper with her face on the front page. "You're everywhere, Maya." His voice was half awe, half fear. She let him in, poured him a glass of water, and tried to smile. "I didn't ask for this. I know, but maybe it's what we need." He unfolded the paper, spreading it on the table beside her medals. "You think people listen to stories like this?" She sighed. "They listen, but do they change? That's the real question." Jamal looked at her, expression hardening. "I don't want to live my whole life thinking the next traffic stop could kill me. You stood there, Captain Thompson, and they still aimed at you. If they can do that to you, what chance do the rest of us have?" His words cut deeper than any headline. She had no answer. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand, gripping it tight. "Then we fight. Not with anger alone. With truth. With persistence. With voices that can't be ignored." Days turned into weeks. Civil rights groups reached out, asking her to speak. Universities invited her to lecture. Advocacy organizations wanted her story on their platforms. At first, she hesitated. She was a doctor, not a politician. A surgeon, not a spokesperson. But every time she thought of refusing, she remembered the officer's finger trembling on the trigger. She remembered the child's eyes. Silence, she realized, would be surrender. And she had not survived to surrender. Her first public appearance was at a small church downtown. The pews were filled with faces, some old and lined with decades of struggle, others young and raw with the energy of protest. She stood at the pulpit, heart hammering, unsure if her voice would carry. But when she spoke, it surprised her with its strength. "My name is Dr. Maya Thompson. I am a daughter, a sister, a doctor, and a soldier. I have saved lives on foreign soil and on American soil. And still, on a quiet street in my own neighborhood, I almost lost my life to fear and prejudice." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued, words falling into place as though they had been waiting inside her all along. "We cannot continue to live in a world where uniforms and medals and white coats must be displayed as shields against bullets. We cannot continue to excuse the fear that turns protectors into executioners. We must demand better. For our children, for our brothers and sisters, for the soul of this nation." Applause thundered through the church. For the first time since that night, Maya felt something other than fear. She felt momentum. In the following months, her voice grew louder. She spoke at rallies where thousands chanted her name. She testified before committees, her calm, precise tone cutting through political theater. She appeared on television not as a victim but as a leader, her words measured but unflinching. "I am not here to be pitted," she said in one interview, her eyes steady on the camera. "I am here to demand accountability. Because if it could happen to me, it can happen to anyone." But with visibility came backlash. Hate mail slipped under her apartment door. Online threats multiplied, venomous and anonymous. Some accused her of exaggerating, others of betraying the country she had served. Police unions issued statements defending the officers, twisting facts until truth bent under the weight of denial. Maya bore it all with the same discipline she had carried into operating rooms. She compartmentalized, focused on her work, reminded herself why she had chosen to speak. But in the quiet hours, the weight pressed hard. Some nights, she woke sweating, the echo of the command, "Hands where I can see them," ringing in her ears. Some mornings, she stared at her reflection, wondering if the world would ever see her as more than the story it wanted her to be. One night, after a particularly brutal news cycle, she found herself driving aimlessly through the city. The streets were alive with neon and shadows, but her thoughts were miles away. She parked near the memorial where names of victims of police violence were etched in stone. She traced the carved letters with trembling fingers, each one a life erased too soon. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unrelenting. She whispered to the stone, to the night, to herself, "Why am I still here when they're not?" The guilt gnawed at her, sharp and relentless. Survivor's guilt was not new to her. She had carried it from the battlefield, but here it was heavier, tangled with history and injustice. She sank to her knees, the cool stone biting into her skin. And then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see an older woman, her face lined but her eyes fierce. "Child," the woman said softly, "you are here because we need you here. Don't you let them silence the gift you've been given. You survived for a reason." Maya swallowed hard, unable to speak. The woman squeezed her shoulder. "We've been fighting this fight for generations. You're the next torchbearer. Don't drop it now." The words lodged deep in Maya's heart. She rose, wiped her tears, and inhaled the night air. She understood then that her survival was not a question, but a responsibility, and she would not let it go to waste. In the months that followed, her movement grew. She collaborated with lawmakers to draft policies on police accountability. She met with families of victims, holding their hands, listening to their grief, promising them her voice would not waver. She organized training programs that brought officers and community members into the same room, forcing them to see each other not as enemies, but as humans. Change came slowly, resisted at every turn, but it came. Body cameras became mandatory in her city. Independent review boards were granted power. Conversations once dismissed as radical entered the mainstream. And through it all, Maya remained visible, tireless, determined. Yet she never forgot the fragility of it all. Every time she saw flashing lights on a quiet street, her chest tightened. Every time she passed an officer on the sidewalk, her muscles tensed. The fear never fully left. But neither did the fire. 1 year after the incident, she stood again in the golden light of evening, this time on a stage built in the heart of the city. Thousands gathered, their voices rising in chants of unity. Behind her, a banner read, "Justice is a duty, not a choice." She looked out at the crowd faces of every color, every age, every background and felt the weight of history pressing against her shoulders. She lifted the microphone, her voice carrying strong and clear. "A year ago, I stood on a street corner with a gun pointed at my chest. Tonight, I stand before you unbroken. Not because I am stronger than others, not because I am braver, but because I was given a chance that too many never receive. We cannot let survival be a matter of luck. We must make it a guarantee." The crowd roared. She raised her hand for silence, her gaze sweeping the sea of faces. "This is not just my story. It is our story. And together, we will write an ending where justice is not a dream, but a reality." The golden sun dipped low, casting her in light that felt almost sacred. For the first time, Maya believed it. Change was possible. The torch was burning, and she would carry it until her last breath. The stage lights dimmed as the crowd's roar faded into chants that rippled through the city streets like a heartbeat. Maya stood tall, her chest rising and falling, her body exhausted but her spirit refusing to yield. She had not asked to lead a movement, yet here she was, a symbol, a vessel carrying centuries of struggle into the present. And as she stepped down from the stage, she knew the fight was far from finished. The following weeks brought both progress and backlash. Policies were debated in city council meetings where her name became both a rallying cry and a target of scorn. She testified again before lawmakers, her voice calm even as detractors tried to twist her story into weakness, into exaggeration, into a problem of her own making. "Captain Thompson," one senator sneered during a hearing, "don't you think this is less about racism and more about officers being careful in dangerous situations?" Maya held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Senator, if my skin color makes me dangerous while my white coat and my medals make me invisible, then what you call caution is nothing less than systemic prejudice. And if I, a decorated officer, am nearly killed for existing, what hope does a teenage boy in a hoodie have?" Silence blanketed the chamber, the senator's smirk dissolving under the weight of her words. The cameras caught it. The world replayed it. Another crack in the wall of denial. But cracks are fragile. Weeks later, as Maya left the hospital after a 14-hour shift, she found her car vandalized. Windows smashed, words spray-painted across the hood. "Traitor. Lies." She stood there under the harsh glow of the streetlight, her throat tight, her pulse cold. Around her, the world was quiet, indifferent. She could have broken in that moment. She could have retreated into silence, into safety. But she remembered the older woman at the memorial, the torch she had been told to carry. She touched the jagged glass with steady hands, then walked away. She would not give them her fear. Instead, she gave them her persistence. She expanded her work, building alliances not just with activists, but with officers willing to listen. She created programs that taught de-escalation, that demanded accountability, that turned protest into policy. Slowly, painfully, things began to change. Not enough, never enough, but change nonetheless. Still, the hardest battle was internal. Nightmares haunted her. The memory of that gun barrel never softened. Some nights, she woke in a sweat, convinced she was still standing in the golden light with death staring her down. Therapy helped. Writing helped. Speaking helped. But the wound was always there, invisible yet unhealed. One evening, she was invited to a local school. The gymnasium was packed with children, their voices loud with anticipation. When she walked onto the stage, silence fell, dozens of eyes fixed on her. She spoke gently, telling them about medicine, about service, about hope. When she finished, a small hand shot up. A boy, no older than 8, asked, "Dr. Thompson, were you scared that night?" The question pierced her deeper than any headline. She knelt, meeting his gaze. "Yes," she said honestly. "I was terrified. But being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. What matters is that fear didn't stop me. And it doesn't have to stop you." The boy's eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something lift from her chest. Maybe this was why she survived. Not just to fight, but to teach. To plant seeds in young hearts that might grow into something stronger than hate. Months turned into a year, then 2. The incident became history, archived in articles and documentaries, discussed in classrooms. Some people forgot. Others moved on. But Maya never did. She carried it with her in every patient she treated, every speech she gave, every law she fought for. She carried it as a reminder that survival is never enough unless it sparks change. One afternoon, she visited her parents' house. The living room smelled of old books and jasmine tea, the walls lined with photographs of marches, protests, and family milestones. Her mother handed her a worn album, pages filled with black and white images of ancestors who had fought in their own time. "You see, Maya," her mother said softly, "you're not alone in this. You're a link in a chain that stretches back generations. You may feel the weight, but you're also carried by their strength." Tears welled in Maya's eyes. She closed the album gently, her chest warm with both grief and gratitude. That night, she dreamed of the golden light again. But this time, the gun was gone. Instead, she stood surrounded by faces: her brother, her parents, her patients, the children from the school, the woman from the memorial. They all held torches, the light joining into one great fire that pushed back the darkness. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but for the first time, they were not tears of fear. They were tears of release. The final chapter of her public battle came when she was invited to speak at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. The crowd was vast, the air heavy with memory and promise. She stepped onto the stage, her white coat replaced by a simple black dress, her medals pinned modestly at her side. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the names etched into the stone around them, and began. "I once believed survival was enough. That if I could just live through the moment, that would be victory. But I have learned that survival is only the beginning. What matters is what we do with the life we are given after survival. Do we hide it? Or do we use it to fight for those who no longer can?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from truth. "I am not a hero. I am one woman who was nearly erased. But I stand here because I was spared. And because of that, I owe my life to those whose names are carved here. I owe my voice to those who will come after. Together, we owe it to each other to make sure that no child grows up believing their skin makes them a target. Justice must not be a dream. It must be our reality." The crowd erupted in applause, not just for her, but for the generation she spoke for. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the sound wash over her, not as validation, but as promise. When the ceremony ended, she stood alone for a moment, the setting sun casting everything in that same golden light she would never forget. She touched the medals at her side, then let her hand fall away. She didn't need them anymore. She didn't need proof. She knew who she was. She was Maya Thompson, doctor, soldier, survivor, torchbearer. And as the light bathed her in warmth, she whispered to herself and to the world beyond, "You tried to erase me, but I am still here, and I will not be silent." The golden horizon burned brighter, as if answering back. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.